Today, once again, product safety community, and welcome back to the sixth in our 7-part series on communicating product safety. We're so glad you're saving so much time for us here today because we have more great content coming your way. And before I introduce our speaker for this session, I would just like to remind everyone that the entire series is being recorded so that it can be revisited later, share with your colleagues if they missed one or two, and will be available on the SPSP website. And that will take place later this week or early next. So be on the lookout for that if you so desire. And so our session today is intended to be really interactive, and we'll be providing some great information, but I want to very much strongly encourage your questions, your comments. You can use the chat or you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Both are available to help you interact with our speaker and share your own stories and ask your own questions. So with that, I would love to welcome Jen Schechter to the series today. And Jen leads consumer outreach at Consumer Reports. And so she'll be sharing a lot of great information with us about Consumer Reports, how things work. And, the focus of this session is really on how consumer and media stakeholder input can impact the company's product safety decisions. So a lot to unpack there and a lot of great information to come. So with that, share your questions and your comments as you think of them. We really want this to be a dialogue. And I will turn the floor over to Jen. Welcome and thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. It's so great to be here. I'm sure I've met some of you in person. I wish we could be in person, but so glad to see all of you here on Zoom today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jen Schechter. I'm the Senior Director for Content Impact and Outreach at Consumer Reports. I have been here, it's 23 years this month, which is, I would have already graduated. It's like how old someone is when they graduate from college. So it's a really long time. And in my role, I've had a number of different roles in the organization. And in my current role, I engage with companies pre and post publication, which is why I may have spoken to many of you. I also oversee our investigative unit, which has done investigations into issues like furniture tip over and infant sleep and safe food. So food and product safety are really, really my passions. And I'm actually the first person to hold this position of engaging with companies pre and post publication. And we learn a lot from these exchanges, and we always really appreciate your feedback when we do. So that's a little bit about me. And just to tell you a little bit about Consumer Reports, I never assume people know who we are. So we were founded in 1936. So I haven't been there since the very beginning, by a group of scientists and journalists who actually believed in comparative ratings as the answer for how we could improve the marketplace. And we are nonprofit. We don't accept any ads and we don't accept any free samples whatsoever. We have a magazine, but we also have a website, and we're very active on social media. For those of you who have been to our Yonkers headquarters, you'll know we have more than 50 state-of-the-art labs where we test everything from appliances to electronics to strollers. We have a lot of ingenious ways we test. We soil all the dishes exactly the same way. It looks like art actually when we do it. We have this amazing anechoic chamber where we test headphones. And we have a lot of amazing experts at our labs. We also have a 327-acre auto test track in Connecticut, which is a converted drag strip, which is a lot of fun, where we test cars. In addition to our labs, we also operate one of the biggest surveys out there. It used to be an annual questionnaire, and we do it 4 times a year now. And we ask members about everything from, their vacuum cleaners to their electronics, to all household appliances, about their experiences. And that's actually where we get our predicted reliability for how likely a product is to hold up in the long haul, as well as owner satisfaction. So how satisfied are you with your product? And a combination of owner satisfaction, predicted reliability, and our lab ratings is what goes into our overall score that forms all the ratings on our website. We test, and have reviews on many thousands of products a year. One thing you'll notice that's been new in the last year is we also have something called Outside the Labs, where our journalists actually buy products and they test them and they give reviews of them, and they have editors' choices. And it's a way of actually reaching different audiences, getting out there with the information quicker, and providing sort of more first-person engaging reviews of products. Now, they certainly don't replace the scientific ratings that we do, but we found they're a really nice complement. So you may have seen some Outside the Labs. We're looking at everything from pet trackers to puffer coats to slippers. We're really branching out because we're finding consumers are interested in a lot of different products. We also actually do take in sometimes external ratings from groups like the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, their crash test ratings, or we recently incorporated the EPA's smog and greenhouse gas emissions evaluations to label green choices for cars. So we do also take into account, in specific cases, external ratings. And we have a staff of about 550 or 600 people, 550 to 600. We're now spread out across the country, but we're mostly focused in the tri-state area. So who do we represent at Consumer Reports? We have 6 million members. And what is a member to Consumer Reports? These are people who either subscribe to the magazine, subscribe to the website, both, somebody who gives us a donation, somebody who, you can be a member, and we call it sort of our free tier. You subscribe to a free online newsletter. You share a story with us about an experience with a product or a service. You take an action. So Consumer Reports also has a very active advocacy arm that many of you may be familiar with. And so we will email members and ask them to take an action to support a piece of legislation, or to write to a company and say, can you please make this change? So that's also part of being a member. And something else new that we're doing is we're also engaging consumers in community research projects. And what I mean by that is we tested water last year, and we had 120 volunteers from around the country who we sent water testing kits to, and they tested their water. And we sent them into a lab, and we were able to do this great national project. And we recently collected 30,000 cable broadband bills, internet provider bills from consumers to analyze. So that's another major initiative that we have, and the way we engage with consumers. So we also, another way we engage is consumers who have had experiences with products or have been harmed by products come to Consumer Reports and tell us about their experiences. And we were one of the co-founders of Parents Against Tip Overs, helping to mobilize the parents that have been incredibly impactful in advancing marketplace change in that area. So we also represent consumers in a variety of settings. We represent them in great gatherings like this, where it's a great opportunity to connect through standard setting committees like ASTM, which is a very, very valuable forum for change. ANSI, Underwriters Laboratories. We also testify before Congress, and of course in our publications. So those are just some other ways. And we're part of safety coalitions a lot in product safety and auto safety, and in food safety. We join with other consumer groups. So I wanted to give folks a sense of what consumers have actually told us about product safety. So in addition to all these surveys, that we send out to our members, we also do nationally representative surveys, and we ask consumers questions about a host of issues. And so a little over a year ago, actually it was July of 2020, we did a survey of about 2,000 adults, and we asked them some questions in the product safety realm. And I just wanted to share some of the findings with you. We asked them in terms of their expectations of product safety and expectations about what they think happens before a product goes on the market, what their expectations are of companies after a product comes on the market. So a couple of interesting findings that I wanted to share. So 97% of US adults say they expect the manufacturer of a product they buy for their home to design and test the product before selling it to customers. And when asked about products over $75, 96% believe the products they buy for their home actually adhere to a required safety standard. And 93% agree it's the manufacturer's responsibility to do everything they can if a product is recalled to remove that product from the marketplace, even if the consumer doesn't initially respond to the recall. And 84% say that if the manufacturer learns of a safety problem with the product that could potentially cause an injury, that they should take action as quickly as possible. I'm sure none of these numbers are surprising, but they do provide a really important context in which we do our product safety work and in which we do these evaluations because we're representing these consumers who have these expectations. And I think we share that goal that, you know, consumers are your top priority, they're our top priority. And, you know, all of us want to make sure consumer expectations are met. Now I want to talk a little bit about the CR process and really when you might be hearing from me or a member of my team. Because last week I did listen in on Michael Del Negro's presentation, which was really, really great. And he talked about, you know, the culture of safety and what are the inputs that come into a company and what happens when you get those inputs and then what do you do? Well, consumer reports is one of those inputs that you may get. And so I really just wanted to provide a very in-depth look at what our process is, when you may hear from us, what that process looks like, and really see if you have any questions or comments, because of course we're always looking to improve our process. But I think the consumer only benefits when we have a really good line of communication between us. So we collect data in a variety of ways. So we look at emergency room data, we look at CPSC incident data, we look at social media and what consumers are saying. And of course, we do our own lab tests. And we also have a place on our site where we ask consumers to report any issues they're having with products. So we can get our information a variety of ways. So let me walk through kind of probably the most likely scenario in which you'd hear from me. So if we're testing something in our labs, and this is really, I'm focused on safety testing. We do, of course, a lot of performance testing, and our journalists are writing stories all the time, and they may reach out to companies for comments, but that's kind of separate and apart from when we identify a safety issue. So for example, in our labs, if we see a failure, a product fails a safety test, normally we only test one sample of a product. If a product fails, we will get a second sample. If that second sample fails, then we have 2 failures that we were able to replicate, and then we feel we are ready to reach out to the manufacturer. If the first sample fails, the second sample passes, we get a third sample. If the third sample passes, that's 2 passes. And then sometimes we do see quality control issues. Sometimes there are outliers. So if we get 2 passes, we may notify the manufacturer just as a courtesy, just to say, hey, we're gonna include you in our ratings. We're not documenting this failure, but here's the lot code, serial number, date code, just so you're aware. If we get a second failure, then what we do is we will reach out to the company. And generally, we're reaching out to the product safety person. And, we're finding that person either because I've met them before, because somebody in our company has met them before. We'll also generally copy a communications person or a brand manager, just because we know that the communications person may be, dealing with the issue, but really we want to talk to you, the product safety experts. So what we'll do is we'll put together an email that's got a spreadsheet or, the documentation of the product we tested and any information we have, the date code, a serial number, where we bought it, the day we bought it, and all the information we possibly can share about the product. If it's got different components, the date codes and the markings on those components. We'll also share our methodology. And those are the two main components of the email. If we've looked at saferproducts.gov or other data sources and we see incidents, then we'll note what those incidents are. And so we'll put that email together. We also, within that email, and this is a really important point, Consumer Reports does not do compliance testing. We are not an arbiter if whether a product is compliant. So a failure in our test is in no way an indication that a product is not compliant with either ASTM or ANSI or UL or a mandatory standard. And we make that very, very clear. We may use mandatory and voluntary safety tests as benchmarks for our testing, but it's for comparative evaluation. And generally, when we see failures, we will have tested dozens of products in that category. And generally, we're only seeing one or two failures. So we know our test is feasible and reasonable. But I think sometimes when we reach out to companies, their initial response is, we meet all the standards, we've tested an outside lab, we're compliant. And that is not for us to decide. And so I just want to stress that point, that we are doing comparative evaluations, and this is what we found in our comparative evaluations. And we'll note that, and we'll also note that we're happy to have an off-the-record discussion with the company's experts. And those discussions, again, are always off the record. And we know companies may want to talk to our experts and ask questions. And in the before times, we also welcomed companies to come to our lab to view the products we tested. The one thing we don't do is replicate testing. So you can look at the lab where we did the testing, you can look at the machine that did the testing, but we do not replicate testing. So generally we do this outreach, and I have to say, normally we hear from folks within 24 hours. And I guess I would just say to folks on the phone, I'm very persistent, my team is very persistent. So if you hear from us, even if you don't have all the answers, just put us in a holding pattern and say, thanks so much, got it. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Because that lets us know we've at least reached the right person and that you're on it and that you got it. Generally, in matters of safety like this, we like to deal with them very quickly. But I will say, and now to walk through some of the examples of responses we've gotten, is we've had cases, we had a case with a bike helmet manufacturer who got on the phone with us and said, look, we looked at those lot codes that you sent and we went to an outside lab and they passed, but we'd like to go to another outside lab and pull those exact same codes and do a test, but it's going to take us about a week to do. And in that case, we felt like consumers would really benefit. And so the company came back to us within a week and said, it failed, and we're going to contact the CPSC and initiate a recall. And so that was a great result for the consumer. That was a great, it was a consistent safety message. And so we went out with a story that said the company is voluntarily seeking a recall. The story wasn't this failed CR's test. This is, we got a test result and the company responded. So it was sort of a win-win situation. We've also had cases where companies have said, actually, we already knew about the problem, we fixed it, the product is changed after this production date. So everything with this date code now has the change to it. If that's the case, then we will make every effort to go and buy a product and get that date code to see whether or not, and this is before publication, because again, we want to give consumers consistent safety messages. We will try and find that date code and we will retest. Sometimes the manufacturer will say to us, we can guarantee you we've cleaned out that old inventory. We don't have any of that old inventory. So whatever the consumer is going to get is going to be after that date code. In which case we will base it on the new product. We'll base our rating on the new product, but the model page will note that we tested an earlier version in case somebody has that model or they're looking at a secondhand product for some reason, and we'll note that on the model page. And we'll also ask the manufacturer if they're willing to honor a free exchange for a consumer if they want the new product, or how best for the consumer to communicate with them. So that's another scenario we've had, in actually a few times in the car seat space. And that's been great to get that new information. And like I said, we do retest, and we're always happy. The few cases that we've had in those cases, the product has always been fixed. When they said, please retest after that date code, and we've retested, we've seen that the product's passed. So again, that's great news. Companies don't always, understandably, agree with consumer reports when we come out with our findings. And, there is conversations beforehand. And if the company says, look, thanks so much, we've talked to your experts, we've gone back. Sometimes folks will say, our labs are overseas, we'd like to confer with them. Then we always go to the company and say, then please send us a comment and for publication. And so at that point, we're generally dealing with the communications folks who are sending us a comment for publication that we include. I should also say that, sometimes companies say, look, we have our own test data and it shows it passes. Now, Consumer Reports relies on its own test data for when it goes out to do its comparative evaluations. I will say we take information from companies very seriously. And there have been circumstances where companies have said, hey, did you know about this? Or, hey, are giving us additional information that we take into account that does impact how we go out. So I just want everyone to know that when we go out to when we go out to companies, we haven't decided yet how we're going to write about a product. We only know what we found, and we know we want to have a conversation. So just know that those conversations are really valuable and meaningful for us and shape how we go out to consumers. And I just think that's a really important point that I just want to emphasize to all of you, is that, until we write our story, the conversation isn't over. And so it's just really important that we have that engagement. I should also say that, we do try and go out as soon as possible when we find a safety issue. But again, we do understand companies may need to retest. They need to talk to their labs. And I would say there's generally a 2-week period from the moment we email a company to when we publish, given all the back and forth, given the fact that sometimes companies want to come to our labs. And that's the general time frame that we're having these conversations. We do also contact the relevant government agency. And in most cases, with folks like you, it's the CPSC. And so at the same time that we're contacting the company, we're contacting the government. And there are times when the government, tries to follow up with us and ask us about our testing. And again, that's where we find differences in our tests. The government may say to us, actually, we didn't find this issue in our tests because, our tests look different from yours. And we respect that. But for us, we test every product exactly the same way, and we report our results out to consumers. Another scenario where you may hear from us is because we do analyze government data. As I mentioned before, we're looking at social media, we're looking at emergency room, we're looking at CPSC incident data. And we're also looking at saferproducts.gov. And so there are times when we see, data in real time that we'll contact a company and say, we've seen these incidents in saferproducts.gov. What is your response? Has the company heard about any of these issues before? And so that's another way that you'll hear from us. And again, that's not based on our lab testing. That's because we're just kind of scouring the data. So let me take a pause there because I've been talking for a long time and see if there's any questions or any comments, any feedback.
Yeah, so thanks, Jen. Great overview so far. And certainly, we continue to invite everyone to chat their questions in to us. So just a question related to the start of your testing process. Do you typically notify companies that you will be testing some of their products?
So that's a great question. So we actually have a team of market analysts who are sort of the people on the front lines right at the beginning, figuring out what are the products we're going to test. Our general criteria is the product nationally available, because we're a national organization, and what's the market share. And sometimes we'll, also test like new products or niche products or disruptor products, just because we know consumers will be interested. And so our market analysts will contact companies and say, hey, we're looking to test, what are your latest products that are coming out on the market? And this is a great opportunity to mention that, we welcome dialogue with companies, and actually companies, again, in the before times, they were welcome to visit Consumer Reports once a year and meet our experts and kind of talk to us about what are your products that are coming out. Because we really welcome that information. It's a little bit like Fashion Week for products, like what's coming out, what are your best sellers, what are consumers telling you? And so that we have a sense of what's coming out and how long it'll be on the market, so that we can be really current. There are categories of products that we test all the time, like your dishwashers and our washing machines. And so we constantly want to know what's coming out and how long will it be on the market, so that we can be testing in real time and reporting in real time. So yes, we have market analysts who are in touch with folks, either folks like yourself or brand managers, mostly folks in marketing, to ask them what products are coming out.
So you have those product categories you mentioned, like appliances or maybe automotive, that you're testing consistently all of the time. When you think about products that you might be doing a feature publication on or something of that nature, do you have any kind of regular cycle where you focus on different product categories every other year? Or, thinking about companies that are in certain product categories, would they be able to anticipate when Consumer Reports might start looking at a given category?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So some categories like generators, like that's a, big safety category for us, where we've done some, new testing and developing new protocols. We test those once a year generally, in time for hurricane season, when we know people need them the most. So we'll do kind of a batch, ideally for like May, June, and then rolling through the summer, July and August. There's also products like space heaters, which have, come tragically into the forefront in the last month or so because of the devastating fire in the Bronx. And so those we're probably testing as new products come on the market. Sometimes companies will say, we're going to have this product on the market for the next 2 years. So we know, all right, those products don't tend to change as much. But if we welcome companies to email us to say, we have this new product on the market, and we always pass that on to the product team. Other product categories like furniture or safe sleep, we did an analysis on where did we see incident data, in terms of top contributors, particularly when it comes to children or the older population. And we'll look at kind of those top contributors, and that's how we started looking at, furniture tip over and safe sleep. And a lot of that work, a lot of that discussion takes place at the ASTM level. That is where, those are two issues where Consumer Reports is incredibly active. We're seeing a lot of great progress at ASTM right now on furniture tip over, which is really great. And, particularly on safe sleep, we've also seen some major marketplace movement in that area. But in the case, for example, of safe sleep, there was nothing for us to test. But for example, after we had done a major investigation into incline sleepers, and after that, we got a whole bunch of different products into our labs for us to look at, products that advertise themselves for sleep, but that were, multifunctional products. And we'll just look at the products and say, all right, what do consumers need to know about these products? What do their labels say? What do the manufacturers say? And that prompted a series of follow-up pieces. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we'll just get the products into our labs. In the case of furniture, we've done a series of rolling tests through the years. I think we've tested, between 50 and 60 primarily dressers, just to see how the market is doing. And we've seen some real improvements in that area.
Great feedback. So just a step back to the logistics behind the testing methodology that you're using in your labs. You talked about allowing companies to come in after the fact and look at the lab, or how the testing was done. But we have a question from the audience as to whether Consumer Reports ever records the testing that you're doing in real time, so a company could look at that, respond to that if there were questions, just as a courtesy to the manufacturers.
So it's a great question. Depending on the nature of the testing, where it is incredibly visual, we have recorded the test. So, but we don't know we're going to get the first failure. So the second failure, like in the category of bike helmets, for example, if we've seen issues with the retention system and the strap coming undone, we do try and record the second sample to see what happens. And in that case, you can see what happens. There are some cases where it's hard to see, you wouldn't actually see the failure. Like we had some smoke detectors or, there were dual smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. You can't see the failure. So in cases where the failure can be visible, we are trying to record it so that the company can see and say, oh, wait, can I zoom in on that? Can I see that? Can I, especially at a time when we don't replicate testing and you can't see the rig in person at this time. But yeah, it's a great question. It's something we're starting to do for just that reason.
Good. So that's all the questions at the moment. We'll let you get back to your prepared remarks and see what comes in.
Great. So just a few more points. Again, if folks are interested in coming to Yonkers, please just let me know. I assume in terms of contact information, I'm happy to share my contact information and folks are welcome to contact. We're also doing virtual visits, even if you just want to meet the engineering team and introduce yourself. Lisa and I were chatting for a few minutes before we started, and she made the great point, it's all about relationships, right? And we don't want to just be talking to you when there's an issue. We want to be talking to you when something great is happening, or when there's something to celebrate, or when there's a new product on the market, or, that's why things like ICFSO are great. Lisa and I were talking, we met at a breakfast at ICFSO where, Consumer Reports and the JPMA work on a ton of issues. And it's just always helpful to have that person to person, what they look like, I'm sure with all our jobs, we talk to people at all hours, right? Everyone has, people in their lives. So it just humanizes all of us. So I just wanted to stress that point that, the phone, our virtual door is open to try and forge these relationships. I also wanted to mention that there are times that you may hear from us because we're looking at a product category. For example, in the furniture space, when we were starting to get into it, we sent out an email to all the furniture manufacturers we had contact information for, asking them, what standards do you test to? Are you a member of ASTM? Do you support mandatory standards? Just asking a series of questions for us to get a sense of, where is the industry on a specific issue. We did it recently in the food space. We did our first ever testing for heavy metals we tested spices for heavy metals. And so before then, we went to all the spice manufacturers that we tested and the trade group and said, like, what protocols do you adhere to? What thresholds are you using? Just to help educate us. And we actually learned a lot. We had, we were looking at things like, for example, aerobic plate count. And we heard from manufacturers that said, actually, that's not really an indicator of anything. So it's great, you want to look at heavy metals, but I wouldn't look at aerobic plate count. And here's 4 growers you can talk to, and here's why. And that was really interesting. So, that's feedback that we always appreciate. So you may hear from us, and it's going to look like a form note in that way. And we're going to ask a series of questions, and we really appreciate the feedback. It looks like there's, I think, a question in the chat.
Yeah, so, when you're talking about this outreach from Consumer Reports, where can our participants expect to see that coming from? Is the email from you, Jen, or a member of your team, or is it a more generic that, might get caught in spam and maybe something gets missed?
That is a great question. So if it's a safety issue, it's going to come from me. It'll come from me, Jen Schechter. I am the person who deals with it. I also have 2 people on my team. They're awesome, Nicole Cerubo and Janice Smith. And so generally, if it's a safety issue, it'll come from me, but it could come from Nicole or Janice. And Janice is the person who generally finds me the right person at the company. She has a knack of just being able to locate the right person. And if for some reason we haven't heard back, she will call and say, hi, you've received an email. It may have gotten caught in spam. It may not be familiar to you. And she'll stay on the phone with them while they find it. It's a really good question because we do have what we call our external relations inbox. And when we do these kind of more mass outreach, it does come from the external relations inbox. So that's a good flag. Maybe it should come from just Janice's email because it could get caught in spam. Or maybe the follow-up should come from her email. But that's a really good point.
So great question. Thank you for that. And you mentioned, you've worked with trade groups occasionally when you're, going out maybe to do a broad investigation or something of that nature. Is that something that Consumer Reports typically tries to do, to contact trade associations to get help in finding people who may be in those product categories or finding the right individuals?
We do reach out to trade groups a lot because they tend to have a lot of information, have a lot of statistics in terms of, if we're looking at a product category, really know their industry and be experts in that field. So we do reach out to them a lot. We reach out to them a lot for comments. We do see them a lot at voluntary standard setting committees. And I know when we, also, for example, developed a new protocol for child seats. It's like 8 years ago now that we did that. We did talk to a lot of stakeholders beforehand, just to get a sense, to let folks know this was coming. And, we often do webinars too. And I think, Lisa and I were talking, we did do a webinar, for example, with the JPMA about this car seat protocol because members were interested and they had a lot of questions.
Mhm.
And so I think it's always great, and particularly if we have a new protocol coming out. We don't develop brand new protocols very often. Car seats was one where it took us about 18 months to develop that protocol.
And that's a great point as well, to just to put a finer point on that discussion, that any company or brand in a particular market space certainly should be engaging with their own appropriate trade association, because there's so many instances where the trade association can be a help, especially when we're talking about hearing from advocacy or media groups. Certainly making those connections is a great thing to ease the process, I would say.
Yes. I mean, and so often the trade group can point us in the right direction or say, you really should talk to that person. Sometimes a company will say, you know what, we're really going to let the trade group respond. And like they were going to represent us, and it just gives us an opportunity to then familiarize ourselves with the trade group.
Good. So keep your questions coming. No new ones at this moment.
Great. All right. So I'm just looking at my, one other thing that I should mention is, I talked about if when we contact a company, the company says to us, actually, we've changed it already. But then there's another scenario, which is 6 months after, for example, we found a safety issue with a product, we'll contact the company and say, have you made any changes? And, just to see potentially if they have. Sometimes the company has, in which case we'll retest. Sometimes the company doesn't respond or says, nothing major. But if it's, for cars, it's very expensive to do. But for a product like a bike helmet or a stroller, for example, we'll get the product in and we'll look at it and see if there's been changes, or a blender. And so we've had cases where we haven't heard from the company. We ordered the product. If the product looks exactly the same, we won't retest it. But if there are differences, like we had a bike helmet where there was a failure 6 months later. We didn't hear from the company. We got it in. The buckle looked completely different. We retested it. It passed. So that is part of our process, that we will go back 6 months later and see with a product if there's been any changes. The other thing I should mention is when we contact a company, if that product is sold exclusively at a retailer, we will contact the retailer as well. And, we've had cases too, and I know you heard from David Kosnoff. He used to be at Amazon and he was super responsive. We had cases where we had these off-brand, I think it was carbon monoxide or dual detectors that failed our tests. They didn't claim UL certification, which is kind of the gold standard. And I contacted David at Amazon and he was super responsive, and Amazon changed their algorithm to suppress anything that didn't have the UL certification. And there was like immediate responsiveness because we couldn't reach the company. And Amazon was like, we only want to sell those that have the UL certification. And so it was great. It was like win-win for a consumer. And look, especially major retailers have the ability to stop selling a product that they deem to be unsafe. And there are times when, we'll ask retailers to stop selling a specific product. In the case, if we find, in the case of inclined sleepers, we did ask major retailers to stop selling them. So, it's rare that we do that, but I did want to mention there are cases when we do that. Anything else come in, Lisa, on the transom?
No, not at this moment.
Okay, so then here are just I think I covered everything. These are just sort of my parting reflections from my, experiences working in product safety, which is, just a note about warning labels. And I've talked about this at ICFSO and on panels, which is, and we've done surveys of consumers and, when are warning labels useful? Well, they're useful when they give you like for medication, true instruction on how to use the product, or, with generators, like keep the generator 20 feet, 15 to 20 feet from the house. That is very useful information. But they don't compensate if it requires the consumer to make the products safe. So in other words, the warning label can't compensate for a design that may not be as safe as we believe it should be. So that is my word about warning labels. In terms of as companies, you're the folks who learn about the issues first. And given sort of what consumers expect about safety, I think that, Michael Del Negro talked about this, in terms of having the courage to act and having the courage, it's hard in a company. There are so many demands, and we totally get that. You either are coming out with a product and you have marketing and you have legal and you have comms and you're the engineer, and you only want to do the right thing by the consumer. I guess it's fostering that culture of courage and helping to create that culture of courage within your company, to say, look, I need more time, or I need this additional feature, or I need more research. And I think, I think the companies Consumer Reports deals with are, all very responsive. And, we know that companies only want what's best for their customers, and, Consumer Reports only wants what's best for consumers. So we have the same goal, and I think we want consumers to get consistent safety messages. And, we have engaged a lot more with manufacturers in the last several years than we ever had in our history, precisely because the impact can be so high when we can have these conversations. And I just, I want people to know it's not a gotcha. It's not like we're calling you, then this is coming out tomorrow. It's like, it is the start of a conversation. I think another point is that, and look, I've been on ICFSO panels about this, that, Consumer Reports does believe in the precautionary principle. And I know that is not, I did a panel with Julie Valise, who I love, who is with JPMA and who's at NHTSA now. And, and for us, products should be proven safe before they go on the market. And I've had these discussions with folks at ASTM who say, well, what's the path forward? How can we have a standard before we have a product? And we say, well, you need a standard before you have a product. But I guess just to be very transparent, that is our philosophy, is that there should be safety testing before a product's on the market. Ideally, there would be a standard before a product goes on the market, not that the product goes on the market and then there's a standard. And for us, the absence of information that something is unsafe is not proof that it is safe. So if you're coming out with a product and you're looking and there's nothing that says, oh, a child in this position or a product that does this is not unsafe, that is not validation that it is safe. So I think those are just a few points. I see there's some questions that have come in, so I want to leave time for that.
Absolutely. That's a great discussion point. I know that's a conversation that happens over and over. It's the chicken or the egg, right? Which comes first, the product or the standard? And certainly, to your point, this entire community just wants safe products out there in the hands of consumers, and everyone is doing their best to do that. So a couple of quick questions here. Does Consumer Reports keep records of failures found in certain product categories? And then do you in turn make that available to other manufacturers so that they can incorporate those types of test protocols in their process to avoid similar future failures?
So we wouldn't share like the data sheets per se of competitors, right? Like the dates and the lot codes. That said, it's an excellent question, because just want to confirm this is the site, but we actually have something called a Consumer Reports data intelligence program. And there's a website called data.consumerreports.org. And there's a tab at the top that says rating methods. And we are now making all our protocols public. So the only thing you need to do so we can keep track of who's downloading it is just put your name and your email in it, and then you will get sent those protocols. So if there's not a protocol in there that you're interested in, it may be that it, it's getting updated, or for some reason it hasn't been posted, but please take a look at data.consumerreports.org, go under ratings methods, and we, for exactly that reason, are posting our protocols so folks can see how it is we do our testing. And this data intelligence project of Consumer Reports, we do license our data in various categories to manufacturers. So like big categories like dishwashers and televisions, where companies are looking for our data to improve their products. And so take a look at that website. And obviously, if you have any questions, let me know. But it is a great resource so that we are being more transparent about how we're testing. And companies, we also, all the articles about any safety issues we found, we post online. And those are all free.
Excellent. And I just dropped that link into the chat. So if anyone didn't get to scribble it down real quick, you just visit the chat and you can bookmark it from there. Does Consumer Reports ever share information with the CPSC about the conversations you've had independently with companies?
We do not. Those companies are off the record. The only thing that we tell the CPSC is that we have contacted the company.
Great. Well, it doesn't look like any other questions have come in. So I would just like to echo, this message we've had several times throughout our series, in that relationship building is so important. And one of the most important things we've been focusing on in this series is communication skills and all of the things that means and all of the tips and techniques. And we've learned so much, but relationship building is really at the foundation of that. And, Jen, so gratefully, you've welcomed everyone to come find you. And if you don't know Jen, if you're not familiar with Consumer Reports, you're going to ICFSO or ASTM, seek her out, introduce yourself, talk about your company, meet her team. And that's one of the most important things I think we can all do to keep the lines of communication open and transparent. And, we can all do better and do great things from there. So with that, Jen, thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks so much, everybody.
It was a wonderful session, and our next one will start in just about 30 minutes. So we'll see you all again soon. Thanks, Jen.
Bye.